Welcome back, you guys. This is the Art School Graduate. My guest today built EK feet from a spare bedroom into a 50-person agency, sold it, went in-house as a chief creative officer, then came back to a dream firm as a partner, and then walked away from it all to start something brand new. And now, 20 years in, he is still a true graphic designer to his core, and someone who has never believed that doing significant work and doing great work are two totally different things. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest today, Gus Granger. Gus, my man, how are you doing?
I am well. Thanks for the kind words and thanks for having me, Justin.
No
Appreciate it.
problem. So, Gus, let's take it back to the beginning. You described yourself as at your core, a graphic designer. Even after 20 plus years of leading agencies, starting businesses, serving as a chief creative officer, and the creme de la creme, advising some of the world's largest companies. Why does that original identity still matter to you after all you've done?
I think that for the way that I was brought up in the profession, at least in the early days in school, and that the foundations of using critical thinking, conceptual thinking, these skills of typography and art direction and storytelling, all of this stuff together to me kind of lives under this umbrella of graphic design. I am one that includes things like interactive design as a subset of graphic design, and even product design when we're looking at interfaces is still the fundamentals of like typography and pacing still live under that umbrella. And that it's, I don't know, I'm like, I think the parallel for me is like that, there are plenty of coaches that came up in their games as athletes, and they're still going to refer to themselves as an athlete or as a basketball player. But I'm like, I think with all of the, different zigs and zags that I've had career-wise, at my core, I was always a graphic designer, whether it was when I was running a design practice to an in-house team to now with Waza, where it's smaller. It was an opportunity for me to just kind of return to my roots and do what I loved in the first place.
Was it just that yearning to still create, or was it that yearning to just have that influence?
I think it's both. I think for me, what was always satisfying for me as a designer is working with other people, whether it's the collaborators around the project, working with clients, and making this thing, whether it's physical or digital or motion, that can move people to buy something, sign up for something, to get on board with a cause, that creating something that has an impact, that it's always felt satisfying for me. And I think there was a point where it was as rewarding to see kind of like my teams that I was managing and equipping and bringing them work and seeing them do it and seeing them have that success, when it may have been, my name on the door or something, but I wasn't as plugged in that for a long time, I felt like, oh, it's as rewarding, but I think I missed it.
Gotcha.
And so I think it's, getting back to it it's been satisfying for me, because I think as you're growing businesses, there does get to a point where I think, depending on the way you grow an agency, it can take you further and further away from the thing which you loved in the first place, which was part of my story when we start thinking of those zigs and zags that I took and led to where I am now.
Okay. So something I noticed throughout your work is very much storytelling. You keep that very upfront and in your work. But for you, you've lived many different lives, born in Chicago, raised in Minnesota. Now you're in Dallas. Now, these are three very extremely different environments. How did moving through these places in your life shape the way you see design and storytelling?
Well, I'll add one more zig, because now I'm from Dallas to now in Brooklyn.
So yeah,
It's constant. There are times that the moving around happens so much. People are like, "Are you in the military?" And I'm like, "No, it may have felt that way."
Yeah.
No, I think that it's as far as the way that's influenced work and story, that I'm not sure if it's like been the different places, or that the roots and kind of growing up in Minnesota, in a suburb of Minnesota, as one of 7 Black kids in a giant white high school graduating class, and that impacts the way you approach work and the way that you approach life, and wanting to be seen or wanting to tell stories that aren't being heard or stories that I want these people to hear that, that I think that perhaps as a starting point kind of gave me some focus while they're doing things that might have been more about, before even getting into design specifically in my artwork, there was a point where I was going to be an illustrator or I was going to get into into comic books where there were things that I was wanting to do that were very much along those lines and wanting to like impact change or, fight, kind of elevate marginalized voices or my own marginalized voice in my works, leave it there.
Okay.
But the different moves and places have more to do with just a curiosity and not wanting to, perhaps a restlessness, but
Yeah.
not being afraid to kind of like jump into different places and try to grow and do new things.
Okay. Now, this is something I was extremely curious about. And you founded and built 70K Feet in 2003. You were the head of it and led it for 15 years. What did it feel like to hand over something you built? And what did that teach you about identity and ownership?
The growth of, I think, when I think of the full arc and growing 70KFT from being kind of from an extra bedroom to every time, it's like every time a number doubles in terms of like the size of the organization, it becomes a totally different thing. Like a lot of people you talk to a freelancer, as soon as they have a person working for them, it's a very different thing. Suddenly when there's 3 people there versus 6 and 12, and then it's 24, that each is a different chapter of growth. And that, when we were as big as kind of like, there's 50 of us and my wife was helping me run the agency and we were doing design and strategy and digital marketing. And we had a team which was doing public relations.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
it was a amazing manifestation of a dream that I'd had, really kind of going back to design school when I was looking up to firms like Pentagram and VSA Partners and others. And I was like, oh, that's what I want to do. When I got to that point, what I didn't was, at least what was missing is, I think, as I mentioned earlier, so it's like that distance from the work.
Right.
And I think it's part of what I think doesn't get talked about enough is that at a certain point, you're it changes so much that you have to be ready for what it becomes. And that, when I'm the CEO of a 50-person group, and I'm like, my time it's rarely about design anymore. Suddenly it's about business development and insurance and finance and a lot of things that, may pay well or it's nice to have the responsibility, clout, and, but it didn't make me happy. And there was a point where I was like, how can I continue to take care of my team, which was dearly important to me? And like, I have this group of folks that are so just talented and was like, there's a,
it's like a family.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And I use that term very specifically then, where when the opportunity came for the agency to be acquired by a client, which was, I can keep this team together and I can be closer to the work. Now we're part of a larger thing than just being, a standalone agency. And so I leapt at the opportunity in it. And that was a great way to kind of, for me to get back to what I loved in the first place or get closer to it, and kind of taking on a chief creative officer role and learning what the brand experience and building process looks like from the in-house, or what we call on the agency side, the client side. And it was just another opportunity to grow even more while taking care of my family. I think the way that I realize that, there are times when you've got all these people working for you, you look around, you're like, you know what? When you're just having a day that's down and you're like, I don't know if I like this job anymore. When you're the one that's in charge, you can't give your 2-week notice.
You know what? I'm calling out today. We need you here.
Dang. Then like that kind of stuff is easier to do to a certain extent. But when it's like you call out too much, you're like, hey, we've got to keep the lights on here.
Right.
But if it's like, you know what, if I don't want to do this anymore, suddenly you're like, everyone there can kind of move on except for me.
You.
And so I'm like, well, what if I just change it? And most of the people kind of came along and it was a great shift. And like, there are some people that did not sign up to work at 70KFT that wanted to go in-house, and that was okay too. But it was a great kind of change in season for my career, and it was great for my health and great creatively, I think.
Finally got some sleep back, caught up on
Yeah.
some sleep. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about brand strategy and some creative thinking. You said that significance, it is more important than money or selling widgets. Now, how do you hold on to that? That's a very strong standard to hold on to when a client's goals and values don't quite line up with that main underlining tone for you, which is significance.
And so, yeah, and I think there's what I like to refer to as significance in the work that we create versus, I think I've done a lot of work in technology, right? And so helping at the time Verizon sell more cloud computing, look out into the city that I live in. I'm like, I don't think that it has zero impact on the culture and society. And that's how I'm kind of starting to measure significance. During the agency days of that first chapter of like when I'm talking at 70KFT, that was to kind of like look at that Verizon example,
Mhm.
the work that was keeping everybody fed and was helping us win awards and stuff, that was selling cloud computing and all kinds of stuff that was giving rise to the modern technology world that we live in today.
Mhm.
But the most rewarding personally work was the pro bono work that we were doing. That for-profit work made it possible for us to do, really interesting stuff we
Yeah.
had a long ongoing relationship with the Dallas Holocaust Museum that was, well, as Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. So they were constantly doing a lot of exhibits and talks around different social justice matters,
Mhm.
history, and we were kind of like this agency of record for them for over a period of time
Mhm.
that was brought us some really interesting, challenging work that, when we see, we were very close to the museum itself or our office and just seeing like all these school buses of kids being dropped off on field trips to go and see these exhibits that we've helped raise awareness of
Mhm.
and I'm like, that's amazing. And we're seeing billboards across the city that is tremendous. And I look at from when we started working with that institutions when they were just in a small space almost like in the basement of an old
Mhm.
office building to now they're like this big, beautiful architectural jewel standalone building in downtown Dallas that we played a role in making that possible by kind of really showcasing the best of what that institution stands for. I take that work as significant in the role that that institution plays in society and helping people understand what can happen when you let bias and intolerance go unchecked, which is a key mission of that group. And just that I could take this ragtag group of writers and designers and developers and strategists to pour the skill and talent that they were developing doing for-profit work
Mhm.
to take those exact same skills to impact the society and in the community. It was a no-brainer. And that's the work that I love most.
Mhm.
And I try to, when possible, try to get my hands on these days.
Now, does the size of the company change what good brand storytelling requires, or are the fundamentals always the same? Meaning you've worked with the Fortune 500 company, Fortune 1000 leaders, worked, like you just said, you've gone from Verizon to working for nonprofit organizations. Now, does that change how you look at what they are trying to produce, or does that or is there something that you already have, kind of like a plug and play system where you're like, okay, these are the things we must have, and this is how we can fit these people in. That's what I'm trying to get to.
I think that what I've learned is that there are some fundamentals that are going to be the same from like a small organization to a large, and that it's significant, but I think it's just the budgets are different. You're just moving decimal points,
Got you. Okay.
which is not a small thing, but there's it's funny because I remember early on, and just being frustrated in smaller agencies, and it's like, oh, if we have a bigger client, they'd have more money to do this, and the clients will be, easier to work with, blah, blah, blah. And I'm
Hmm.
like, not necessarily. And it's just like the challenges can be just as challenging for a large group, if not more so than a small project. But the fundamentals of really understanding who you're trying to persuade and or reach from a target audience standpoint, and understanding your client and what they're about and how to meet that challenge with your own kind of like talent, skill, passion, drive. And I tend to look at that act of creativity in the midst of all that is I think there's some self-license in there to stir up controversy, to be more artistic,
Yeah.
expressive. That I think it's like we're laying out the boundaries. It's like, all right, here's the box, here's who's our audience, what we're trying to sell, da 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 da. But I think within that place, it's like, all right, I want to do something like this,
Yeah.
whether it's like, I've been curious about working with this photographer. I want to do something which is more about an illustration, or there's some typefaces that I think might be really interesting and appropriate for this audience. That I think there's acts of, I don't want to call it selfishness, but I think it's like you're bringing yourself
Self into
to
it.
that
Yeah.
act of creation.
Yeah.
That I've always considered that part of the creative process more aligned to the artist in us than something that's formulaic and, capital D
Got you.
design.
Yeah.
Whenever we get in these debates of like art versus design, it's like I'll look at it as more of like a spectrum where I'm not just showing up no
Show.
matter what the brief is or no matter what the strategy is. I'm like, Gus
Yes.
just wants to do whatever he wants.
He
And I'm
wants.
like
Yeah.
this. But that if I can carve off enough of an understanding of my client's space and the people they're trying to reach, and that I'm like, you know what, I think this thing that I'm really curious about and passionate about trying out and experimenting with is gonna work. And I'm like, that's where you can just kind of dig in deeper with the strategy to be like, oh, you might think this feels risky or out there, but based on what we know about this audience, we think it's going to be great. And so then you can kind of just like double down on the science or things that people want to be more concrete, to
Right.
kind of arm yourself when you're pitching these projects, when you're trying to get clients to take risk. To it's kind of it's the judo move, so you can kind of try more things that are out of the box, and you're just arming yourself with the science, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It totally does. Now, this is something you just mentioned, you can do that. I want to say design judo, as you just said. When you sit down with these companies and you're working in the space for the design judo aspect, you're taking something that's complex and invisible and turning it into something that people can tactilely feel. So designers, we all know we're problem solvers. What is your entry point into that problem? What's the first step when you are sitting down with these companies or organizations and you're trying to get them to explain themselves? So, what is that entry point that you look for to say, this is it, this is where we're working, and this is where we're going to start?
What is, for me, what I try to drive first into is like, what's the human
Aspect. Yeah.
aspect of this? I think because even that where this is where we've thrived in kind of taking like these really complex leading edge technology. Like we did a lot of work in like early AI, cybersecurity, internet, cloud computing stuff that
Right.
like even our clients, sometimes their eyes were crossing because they didn't understand it.
Yeah.
At a certain point, it's like, all right, why are people using cloud computing in the first place? And it's like, all right, are they creating an app?
Yeah.
Do what? And like, are they, trying to make it easier for a fast food restaurant to, have their cashiers do things? It's like, there's like, are you
Right.
trying to make a better experience for your employees? Are you,
Hmm.
is this a technology which is going to, help power amusement park rides or something? That it's like, is it, helping, doctors find cures to, mystery illnesses? That it's like, or like, and even in the cybersecurity front, it's like, yes, it's like we're stopping hackers. I'm like, all right, let's set that aside. But I'm like, what happens for a company that actually feels safe? That it's like, and so it's like the the human, the emotional aspect of what you're ultimately trying to create this brand around is more about safety, confidence, and these other things. And that's something I can start to put a narrative around
Got it.
where what happens if you get lost in the technical side of things and
Got it.
it's just bits and megahertz and
Hmm.
blah, 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 blah. And you're like, you get, you just get overwhelmed by the technology of it that the human being on the other side that's making decisions about this gets lost. And so ultimately that's what I try to really like dive into. And I think when I took it the judo-ness on the strategy side, that it's
Yeah.
you can overcorrect, and that I've seen work where it's like it just looks like someone just took a strategy brief and just rubbed a design template on
Yeah.
it, which is too far. Where it's like, I think it's, I usually like to say it's like, you let the strategy be your safety net, not
Hmm.
the foundation of your building.
Got it.
You
So
know,
it's
that
like
it's
they
like,
take it too literal instead of just being like, okay, what is the story? What's the underline we're trying to get to?
yes, I think that it's like, and for the safety that aspect of it, it's not like if something goes wrong, but it's like, I almost like to imagine you're like on the trapeze artist, or you're just trying to do something amazing
Yes.
physically. It was like, look, if I slip, I'm going to try something risky or try something out there, but I have the safety of this thing to fall back on that's backing me up. Where if it's not that, you're just using it something to be like, I'm just going to build on top of this and not try anything interesting, new. And it's like, ultimately, that's where the work ends up being forgettable and uninteresting, unpersuasive. And why
That's
did they come to you in the
unfortunate.
first place?
Yep. And then it'll be a very unfortunate waste of money for them because it's not gonna do what the end goal is.
Yeah.
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 So here's something creative I was looking up and I came across. Typography is something you talk about with real passion. My first introduction to typography, I didn't even have a clue. Was typography? I don't even know. It was just an introduction. Was graffiti for me. But the way you speak about it with like such a fervor. And the idea that you can master type, because some people say you can't because they're coming out with so many different styles and fonts and pairings. And for you, you said you can master it, you can design anything. Why do you think something that fundamental gets underestimated by so many designers?
I think we have so many tools at our disposal, so many fonts, so many there's so much stuff in our bag of tricks that we lose track of what the fundamentals have been. That it's and I think about, because I'm like, when I was in design schools, right there on the kind of edge of like the full embrace of like computers, like literally like my first couple years, like we were learning how to do like markup and like Ruby lift and things that
Are
current art school
extinct now.
students wouldn't know anything about. Like we had stat cameras and things that even my design professor knew we weren't likely to need these things, but he just wanted to have us know the fundamentals. But I think of like, we went through the exercise, like, all right, here's how to order type, that you would have to really specify. I'm sending in my document that has my copy. I'm ordering Vedica 12 point with 8 points of leading. It's tracked like this many picas wide. That it's like the level of detail for that. You're going to a type house that's going to give you your type on like paper that you're going to cut out, put it down on your boards. That level of, here's exactly what you're going to be ordering, and you don't have a chance to mess around with it, to adjust it on the fly, or I'm going to
Right.
make this column a little bit narrower, picture I want to edge over. That it's like
Yeah.
that foundation. There's a few things that it's like, that's that training around making every little decision has to be so intentional, that act of restraint, plus the fact that you're actually ordering type from professionals, that I'm thinking about, like, these are just professional typographers that were just doing this stuff. There's so much that gets lost because we are nowadays wearing the hats of what 50,
Everybody.
60, 70 years ago were worn by like 8 different people.
Hmm.
And the fundamentals of like hierarchy, readability, legibility, which are different things. When to use serifs, when to not use sans serifs, what types of sans serifs do you want to avoid in other circumstances? That it's like, all of that has to do with beauty, clarity, and communication. And it becomes that there's so much that you can control by executing those fundamentals well that you don't have to reach out into one of the 100,000 different fonts.
Right.
I can make that same choice with if I like if I only have to use like 5 fonts for the rest of my career, I'm fine with that.
Hmm.
And there are design programs that are like, here, pick your font. This is what you're going to use for the whole semester. That I say all of that once you get those fundamentals down, there's really clear experiences in UX can ultimately come down to just clear typography. Same thing if I'm laying out a book. That it's like I'm going to treat the folio and the page number differently than the body copy, than the chapter heading, as opposed to the cover, and all those things that it's like those fundamentals are the same principles that affect the way that I'm going to design the top of a tertiary page on a website versus if I'm doing like wayfinding for a national park.
Yeah.
That's where I'm like, all of that stuff around how legible something is, what the personality that comes across from the style of type, understanding, like the more I get down to that stuff, then it's like understanding how to, make something digital or printed that's just medium at that point. So,
Right.
and I think that's where that came from. If that
Got it. That
longer
makes sense.
than you
No,
signed for.
no. It took me a while to understand typography just because the way I learned graffiti, I was like, oh, this is easy. But once you get into it, I literally took a bookmaking class where we had to get the that's not whalebone, but that bone out and press
Yeah.
the covers and do all that. And then we had to set our own type. It drove me crazy because it was like you had to practice it. You had that one sheet where you had to press it on the paper first. Okay, look at it. Okay, you see that? You see how your R is kind of bent up and you're looking down and you're like looking at it. So that's why I was like, how do you master this? Because there's in that one block of lowercase r's, there's 50 of them. So it's just like that to me is just like, man, you can master this. That's crazy. But I loved it because at that time, it allowed me to become more familiar with the form of the letter versus, oh, the function is just going to be an R. It's like, no. These forms have to make sense because that allows our eyes to see it clearly, tell the story and flow. Because if you use Helvetica for one and Times New Roman for the lowercase, they're going to look close, little bit. But to the true eye, you're going to be like, why is that spacing off? Why is this? You're going to know something's weird with it. So that's why I was just like, okay, let me see what his ideals are with typography. That's why I was curious.
I think, and that's right on. And I think, and think of like when you really start understanding kind of like these principles around just like type design and what makes a lowercase g look and like such an unusual letter, like the sans serif different. One thing, but it's like, all right, what's the difference between a Garamond Caslon and the Times New Roman lowercase g? And it's easy to make that look wonky. But now if you're creating a logo from scratch, and it's going to involve a lowercase g, and you're like, all right, what do I like better about the Caslon G versus the G versus some new thing which just came out, that it's like the difference between lights and heavy aspects of the stroke.
Right.
It's like that, all of those things that you can zero in on that are presenting a different. There are times I like when I'll describe fonts as like a voice.
Yeah.
Where it's like, what was I like when I'm seeing that's what I want it to sound like. I say that it's like, all right, there's a difference between, Anderson Cooper saying this is CNN versus James Earl Jones saying this is CNN. It's the same words. It's a different, AUL font. And I think typography is the same way. And like that I will kind of like look at like in font choice and just seems like James Earl Jones speaking quietly versus him yelling versus like all of that stuff is like, I've chosen enough font and now I can make it seem serious. I can make it seem funny. I can like all within the same weight if I just learn how to modulate and control the form of that family of letters.
Yeah, 100%. And the way you said that, I could totally hear his voice when he's talking low, where it goes to that influx. So now, you know what? I'm going to use that in my class. I have to use that because that is an excellent visual for students to even get it now. It's like the way you use fonts is who's talking, who's saying it. There it is. Thank you for that. I'm stealing that from you, my man. That is
Well, and it comes up too where, it's when people are talk about like the jokes about like, oh, they maybe use Comic Sans or Papyrus or whatever. I'm like, you know what? Yes. And I'm like, if I'm having to use Comic Sans to do the funeral program for your grandma, that's not the appropriate use of it, and
right,
it looks dumb, and I'm like, "It
right.
makes sense." What's the right voice for the thing that's going on? I'm like, if I'm doing something that might be sarcastic and clown themed, that it's like, the joke may make Comic Sans be hilarious.
Yeah,
And so it's really about like what's the context in which it's being used. And so
right.
there's a lot of stuff that we kind of like joke about. It's like, oh, this font hobo or Frankfurter or just look like these
Yeah,
things. But it's like there's probably a circumstance where it would be fantastic
to use that.
to use exactly these things that we like to rip on every once in a while.
Yeah. So I want to touch a little bit on your advocacy and designing for good. I mean, you have been tirelessly in working to eliminate barriers for Black designers. Where did that urgency come from? And what does progress actually look like in that space for you?
For me, I come from a family that is always kind of like been I'm just kind of growing up, my dad, my mom, I think just awareness of Black history and the people, the shoulders that we're standing on to be in where we're at today, and that no matter what we're doing in our life to be part of that same struggle. So I think there's always been a sense of responsibility, but that magnifies when I feel like I accidentally got into graphic design and just happened to be comfortable enough to learn about it without seeing people that looked like me, but knowing how difficult it can be, or like it was already to kind of like be in it without, you know, seeing other like Black designers whatsoever, and certainly no Black professors, or that. I think that combination of things from a like early on, like, look, how can like take my own hunger to learn more about people that are in this profession that don't have the light shown on them to
Mhm.
do that kind of like advocacy for the younger version of myself to really look, see. I'm like there was an early form of the Organization of Black Designers had a conference that I got to go to in Philadelphia in like 1997. And it just blew my mind. It was like there's Black architects and interior designers and graphic
Wow.
designers like everywhere. I just showed up from Minnesota, and like I knew that we were out there, but I was always the only one. But just being in that environment and it just being like rich and just mind blowing for me, that it's like, all right, this is the stone that I want to put my shoulder down into and do this work to the best of my ability, while I'm also just trying to have fun and do some just create stuff for clients at the same time.
Right. Now, I'm curious, what needs to change so that a young Black designer today, they don't have to, like, for example, what you said, experience it on accident or fight their way through it alone? What do you think needs to change so that that young Black designer today can actually step into these rooms and feel confident and not have this imposter syndrome?
I think the most important thing, well, there's a number of things, that their experience is valid. I think the aesthetics and taste that they're bringing to the table is unique and valid. And there's going to be things that they're going to learn about. There's going to be programs that are going to try to take that out of you. And it's like, oh, you need to design like the Swiss, or you need to do these things. And that it's like that there may be some fundamentals that are there to be learned by going through that, but
Mhm.
not to lose who you are, and not to lose that things that you were passionate about in the first place. That there's a lot of kind of like the old school design canon that I feel like is being challenged. And my perception is that it's upended today with the work that like Cheryl and so many others have been doing. But my, being distant from, design schools at this point, that I'm like, I suspect that's still a formidable force to push back against.
Hmm.
But I think it was like when, my gosh, I think it was like maybe like 10 years ago when these books started coming out about the W.E.B. Du Bois infographics he did for the
Yeah.
Paris exhibition. My brain broke that I'm like,
Wow.
these things that these amazingly creative, expressive,
Yeah.
beautiful, hyper relevant artifacts of like graphic design from the early 1900s
Hmm.
by Du Bois and some like black students at, I forget what the school was in Atlanta, that completely missing from that didn't even know that it existed. But I think
Right.
knowing that's part of when we look at kind of this, there's more awareness of our heritage
Yeah.
in communications today. That is, those are the things that I'm encouraged about. And that's been part of just the pushing and prodding that's been happening by so
Hmm.
many, in whether it's in their design schools or their design offices or the authorship that they've been doing, that it's just, I it's everyone's having to push in whatever space that they're in
Yeah.
to make this happen.
Now, do you think more students, I know you said you've been out of it, right?
Mhm.
But do you think more students of color are being welcomed into these spaces, or do you think it's more of they're stumbling in? Based on what you know, based on like your history of hiring, looking at people's portfolios, maybe sitting down for portfolio reviews, some of your AIGA days,
Right.
looking at that. So what do you think about that?
I I suspect there's still a challenge because there's just getting into design, going into creative fields is seen as a risk. It's not safe compared to like, oh, just go get a business degree or whatever. That it's like, so that, or, and so if that's not even introduced as an option for you, or you don't take it seriously as an option, I mean, there's so many people that would have been amazing designers that weren't encouraged when they were
Yeah.
in elementary school, middle school, because like, all right, it's time for you to put those crayons away, work on your STEM stuff. But I feel like there's more awareness today, but the work that has to be done, it's like there's just an entire swath of design that's being replaced by automation today. It's not going to, I don't think it's going to replace designers. That, the best of our work is always going to be about connecting with human beings, and that there's gonna, like, even if everything is just done somewhat immaculately by computers, people are going to hunger for something which feels different than what was just automated. I certainly don't think we're being pushed into these spaces, and that it's got to be difficult. I'd imagine it's got to be harder like today than it would have been, perhaps even been like 4 to 5 years ago, because of what's happening with AI. That it's already a space that people are like, "You were going to be a designer?" I'm like, feed yourself doing that? You absolutely can. But there's so much uncertainty in this moment where it's like, look, like I tell design students, I say like I've been out of it and that I haven't been in design school as a student, but I have done some teaching recently and mentoring of young designers, that I'm like, don't get into this unless you are absolutely obsessed with it.
It's a
And that I'm
sacrifice.
like, and if you feel like, if you just are into it and you're curious, I'm like, you can have it as a hobby. That's okay. But the level of drive, curiosity that you just, that ought to be in you in order to be sought out by others, to like, hey, I want you to create this identity for me. I want you to design this app for me. I want you to, do this wayfinding system for me. That there's got to be something which is just raw in you, that it's like, and this is probably a pejorative to be like, look, I don't know that you have to have that fire in your belly to be an accountant or to do something else, that you're like, I'm not, this isn't about following my passion. I'm just learning a skill. And then my passion is boating and I'll go water skiing on the weekend or whatever. But I'm like, I think that's something which is unique for design. And so the cloud of what's happening around with automation today is just making that even more of a challenge, that I think that's keeping people from just being pushed in.
Mhm.
And I think that it raises that bar, or at least highlights that bar, that in my mind, of like, make sure you love this,
Mhm.
as a caution, but also as an encouragement to be like, if it is
Yep.
in you, the water's great. Come on. This is a lot of
Yeah.
fun. It's interesting.
Yes, it is.
It's endlessly interesting. But you've got to, willing to get yourself operating at a certain level and surround yourself with those same types of people over the course of your career to continue functioning at a point where you're going to continue enjoying it and be able to find the type of work that will keep the lights on.
Yeah. Now, You mentioned the one thing I was going to bring up to you, AI.
Mhm.
Where's your stance? How do you feel being that you've helped build some of these tech platforms? You've helped write some of these codes and had your own input in. How do you feel about it? Because listen, I can't be the old guy mad at the AI, but I do let my students use it, but tell them to use it for a research purpose.
Mhm.
I tell them, don't use this for final execution of said logo, product design,
Right.
branding, marketing. I said, no, use it as research. Use it as, hey, what's this? And then you can take that and drop it into Google and keep going. But what is your take on it personally? How do you feel about it?
I think it's like I kind of draw the parallel to it's like if this was like 1900 and we're like, how do you feel about electricity?
Right.
You know, you're
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
okay, well, electric what?
Right.
Like, and so I'm like, yeah, I'm like, it's gonna put the candle makers out of business, or I'm like, or then suddenly you're like,
Yeah.
so, and to be glib, but I'm like, there are people that are like, hey, Gus, do you use AI in your work? And I'm like, yeah. Or people are like, oh, I don't use AI, but but they're using generative fill in Photoshop that's like you're using
The
AI.
AI. Yep.
That it's like there are little things that kind of like creep in where it's like, have you been using Grammarly? That it's like suddenly there's like little aspects of it that kind of have been creeping into the way that we work. That yeah, like maybe like I taught a digital design class at SMU a couple years ago, and where I was like, look, I had my students use ChatGPT to do a really detailed creative brief for your project. Pick your client. You're gonna design this yourself, but I want you to do I want a thorough understand. I want you to have a thorough understanding of your target audience and the business and the competitors. And so it's like that might be something in the professional world. If you're at some big agency, there's a strategy department that would do all that stuff. All right, well now you can just go ahead and automate that.
Yeah.
But like so that's an easy thing, or like perhaps it's like I can use it to help make stronger proposals for my clients. Recently, the Claude design tool came out.
Well, yeah, I saw that. It
And
plummeted Figma.
but here's the rub for all that is like there's like the you're like if you got to give it all this reference material, like what are the brand standards that it's going to follow when it starts to create all this stuff, and suddenly but it's like still requires the designer to decide, what what aesthetic, what's the drive, what's the voice or the copy that's going to like it can do a lot, but it's still requiring that human being to be that director. And now the prompts are going to kind of come in to be like, all right, what is it that I'm creating? Is it a book? Is it a postcard? Is it a magazine? Is it a website? I'm like, what's the right thing that needs to exist in order to reach this audience? I don't know. ChatGPT. I'm like, suddenly you're there. It's there. These tools are going to be here that I think we're going to be okay for a while. And
Okay.
I genuinely do think that if like some doomsday scenario where it's like, oh, graphic designers are all replaced by Claude, there's going to be a vanillaness of like all of this AI stuff that will just exist. And then it's like, how do you differentiate on top of that?
Got you.
Uh, and then, and then my sense is that this may be and I'll say like the upside of just like raw capitalism. But to the degree that people's like, well, if I can just replace this designer with Claude, it'd be like, well,
Mhm.
or then like they're gonna like at some point that raw capitalism be like, well, that designer, if that person can manage 10 Claudes, suddenly it's like
Mhm.
somebody has to have that background, that taste, the vision to
Right.
direct all these. So it's like I think that wheel of profiteering, which is what's driving AI,
Yeah.
is gonna like I don't think there's an inherent drive to get rid of people. There's an inherent drive to make more money with less. And so if
Yeah.
it's like
That's
if
true.
I can have a designer do twice as much work because of AI or whatever, that I think those are the types of things that are gonna come
Change.
about. But then it's
Yeah.
like, what does that quality look like? But if it may be that I've created a rock solid brand identity system and I can plug that into Claude, and or like here, I've made some social card templates in Figma that I know what this looks like. I've created this, all the guides, all of the margins, the type circumstances, the way I want images. If I can plug all those things in, I've designed it all myself. But now it's like, all right, now give me a set of social cards for this,
Yeah.
new product launch. Here's the information. Here's the photos. And now I can create it in like a dozen different sizes.
Hmm.
That's work that that have been, let's just say 8 hours of just production work making,
These cards.
36
Yeah.
different variations of the same thing. That's not the fun part of graphic design. It's the grunt work of graphic design, but
Yeah.
maybe I can have AI do that grunt work. And so
Mm.
I feel like that's more of what it's going to look like at its best. But there are designers that are in the space that may have not had that fire in their belly, or they just have been just pushed into unfortunate circumstances where they're just having to grind and do that level of just repetitive
Yeah.
work. That's where the danger is, I think. That it's like where if it's less creative and it's just more tactical, that's where I think there's more risk.
I told my students, I told them, I was like, listen, AI prompting might become a degree track in the
Sure.
upcoming years because it's just, and it's going to be for the creative, the business, the educational, because being a teacher now and a professor, there's so many LLM things out there. It's crazy for Brightspace, Canva, Canvas, Power School. Like it's so many things. I'm just like, what is going on? But I told my students, I said, eventually this is gonna hit. So just be ready.
And I think we can't know everything at the same time. But I think in my mind, it's like, look, what are the fundamentals of just doing great work?
Hmm.
And just like keep the tools that are helping you be more effective at your job close to you.
Yeah.
And the stuff that that's I think that's where the getting close to the recent Claude announcement. I was like, all right, I'm like, is this really going to be as disruptive as it is? I'm like,
Mm,
it's not the end of the world. It'll be end of a certain type of works world that I don't think people are really that excited about doing in the first place.
true. All right. So let's talk about your second baby, building Waza. Brother, why go back into entrepreneurship? I mean, you made a deliberate shift to go back to build something of your own again. What pulled you back into this realm?
It was love of design. I missed creating things, being and working directly with clients. And like I'd been around, I think, for the decades prior to that, kind of like more of the coach. I'm bringing in the relationships and, there are times that, I'm presenting my team's work or needing to back up the team's work that may not have been the choices that would have made, but it's their vision. I want them to be successful, but I'm like, man, if I
Right.
was in this project, I would have done X, Y, Z. And that, but there was also, I mentioned going back to agency life post Sixterra,
Mhm.
which was still that distance was still going to be there. And that, as I mentioned, like VSA was a firm that I'd worked at when I was a young designer. It was always a dream place. And going back to be part of their leadership for that period of time was tremendous. But there's always this longing. And that, in moving on from VSA and having the opportunity to go to Waza is that in starting Waza was an opportunity to move fast,
Mhm.
embrace new technology quickly, work with
Mhm.
smaller teams. A lot of the folks that I bring on as collaborators are people that I've been working with for a very long time. And we can finish each other's sentences.
That's
A lot of the same clients and things that I've been working with. And it's like, feels kind of like the same family aspect that
mhm.
we talked about in the early part, which was, kind of from the 70 KFT days but it's lighter.
Mm.
Honestly, it's just more like intimate. And I was wondering if I was going to be happy being more hands-on. It's like I'm having to like dust off, Illustrator and Figma and like, oh, the old man still got it kind of thing. And I think there's a generational shift there too. But I think that just having the sense of control and free flexibility of working for yourself, all these things are desirable.
Yeah.
And a lot of fun as we've been growing Waza. It'll be almost 2 years here.
Wow, man. That's amazing.
Yeah, and what's fun about this too is that I've started Wazo with a partner of mine, Simon West, who had been a client for most of my agency life, and so this was his first kind of like foray, kind of like being on the other side
Hmm.
of the curtain, but being able to work alongside like a 7 times CMO of technology companies that we have kind of like we're bringing together like the full brand building
Yeah.
experience from kind of like working with a board of directors and a CEO would be like, hey, let's maybe
Yeah.
this company should exist. There's all this work that happens before, your client calls the agency.
Hmm.
And then when that work is happening, that the client is needing to be the steward of that brand as it grows throughout the rest of the organization,
Got
how
it.
they advocate for it with the rest of the employee base, the sales teams, and all that stuff. And having that perspective into how we're helping our clients has been really like fresh and interesting as well. And so, as I mentioned, a point where there's like in the growth of the first agency, there's just different seasons where the kind of becomes a very different
Hmm.
animal. It's never like you're working at the same place for 15 years. Their time where like it's kind of this felt like 8 different jobs.
Yeah.
And this
That's
one feels
cool.
very different too.
That's cool. So this is one of the segments I put in. It's called rapid fire. So you can give me an explanation, your best answer. It's nothing too complicated, but I have stumped like 3 to 4 people on these questions. So, but they're all related to you. They're not just far off questions. There's things in here that I think it's going to probably kind of put you in a bit of a bind, but I'm curious to
Oh,
hear what your answers are. All right. So, favorite brand strategy right now.
favorite brand strategy. It's funny and this will be controversial. I'm gonna give it to this outlandish work that was done a couple of years ago by Jaguar, where they tried to relaunch the brand. I think it fell right on their face.
It did.
But it was so extreme, but it was like the strategy was like it was so strategy forward where they're like, I loved seeing a brand of that size take its risk and do something so out there that I think it was like being around enough people that were like heritage Jaguar
Yeah, enthusiast, yeah.
enthusiasts. They're like, what have you done? But that's a lot of fun. But honestly, I think it's either that but I'm also cheering for Rivian. I know you don't get two choices.
No, it's fine.
Um, their chief design officer, their old chief design officer is a friend here in New York. But just seeing how many moments they've actually built into the buying experience, but even into the product itself, and like this little moments of just like wonder and consistency across it's beautiful. And it's a company that's doing when we talk about significance, I feel like they're both a for-profit thing but also and trying to do something to help the planet with the way that we're moving ourselves around. I feel like they
Yeah.
might a good balance of that.
Okay. Graphic design or typography?
It's like swimming or water. I don't know.
Well, if you could choose, this is what I like to say, if you could do one for the rest of your life, if it was just graphics, or do you need to have type in there for you? So that's the way I would.
I then in that instance, I'm like, yes, I can design things without type. Then I'll use image and color and rhythm and form and materials and
You're going to find a way to make it work.
yes, yes. I just won't make anything that look like a letter because you made me choose in this moment.
Okay. Here's this one. Your favorite designer.
I'm still going to go to Paul Rand for me because it was an early design. There was an early design influence for me in design school. But as I mentioned, I was very determined to be an illustrator and I was like, well, let me take some design classes just to kind of figure out what design is like. That as I started learning about designers that were expressive and were illustrating in their work, that's kind of like close to my heart. And the writing there was really influential for me in the early part of my career.
Okay. Last one. One word that describes great design.
Passion.
Okay. So this next part, I kind of want you to take your time and just think about these things, because these are things that I feel these questions are kind of in the wheelhouse of like legacy almost. Where do you see things going? How do you see things, turning over for you? Okay. So you spent over 2 decades helping companies show the world who they are. What in all of those years of translating others people's identity taught you about your own?
The thought that comes to mind is authenticity. And I think whether that's just kind of comes with age, I feel less interested in changing to meet other people's tastes or needs and more around, what's the best, fairest, most authentic presentation of an organization, client, or whatever. That it's like we were going through these exercises, but it's like, oh, what does it look like for me as an individual and not being as concerned about what other people think, say, or do about me. It's like, no, this is who I am, and that's what comes to mind in that instance.
Okay. What is something about creativity you understand now that you wish you understood 10 years ago?
It's all fleeting. It's not that serious. Doing the work is serious, but I think at some point a lot of the stuff that we're making is disposable, and that I think it's you've got to just have fun doing the work. Honestly, I think just like be curious with your clients. That the more your clients feel that you understand what they're trying to do, that you understand their audience, that builds up trust so that you can try more interesting things. And that flywheel, which brings the opportunity for you to take greater and greater risks and do more and more interesting things and if it works out, that's amazing. And you've got perhaps something you can hang on to or a memory, which is rewarding. And if it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world. And it's,
Yeah.
that I think that on top of that, because most clients, perhaps this is part two to that answer. Most clients can't tell the difference between C plus and A work.
They can't. I'm
And
laughing because they can't.
and that's not me just kind of just trying to like look down on clients and things, but that it's like that we can just drive ourselves crazy trying to take something from being a B plus to an A. And I'm like, and be about that. That like but within that where I'm like, you don't get you, like, if you're like, I'm going to press this concept and if the client doesn't buy it, this project is a disaster, they're going to be happy with that second thing you didn't want to make. And just take your battle to the next one because this is all temporary. But I think life is too short for us to spend our time making stuff that we're bored by.
Yeah.
And I think what drives people into this, this profession tends to be work that we were excited about, whether it was like album covers or what I think it's like, or comic books or something else that is like, if we can hang on to that hunger and delight and bring some of that to, into surprising places,
Hmm.
that's I think there's a hunger for that even in the most driest of corners of the industry, because nobody wants to be bored.
That's
And so
true.
just find a way to make something that a lesser designer would make dry and uninteresting, make it colorful and dazzling and breathtaking. And that's
Yeah. So now, as one of these top great designers, Gus, you've traversed the whole course of design in your life and in your career path. What advice would you give someone who feels pulled in multiple creative or professional directions? Because, many people feel that they have to stay in one lane. But like you spoke to it earlier, it's like now as designers, you're not just a designer, you're app designing, you're coding, you're a website builder. So what advice would you give someone who feels pulled in multiple creative or professional directions?
I think I would find the common thread across the different areas you're being pulled into and make sure that, I think like there's many graphic designers that end up going into music. There's oddly so many musicians that started in like art school,
Hmm.
or like I know a lot of designers that go into filmmaking. That I think there's something about the creative process and being comfortable taking something which doesn't exist and making it manifest to other people, whether that is through sounds, sight, or even like smell and taste if they get into cooking, that there may be like some common threads there that if you can find that you can develop the skills that those areas that are of interest to you
Yeah.
to continue to sharpen that stuff without wearing yourself out, then go after that. You mentioned coding, and frankly, this might be, I think, again, was going back to the AI thing. There was a point 10 years ago where I'd say, like, I would rather a designer be a sharper designer than also try to be like the best coder in the world. To be like,
Right.
just get your design skills here
You
and
can
bring in
learn
a
that.
great
Yeah.
developer, build what you did. Now it looks like many of those computer science folks are being displaced by AI tools that maybe just knowing just enough code or prompts so that you can build what you want is going to be what the case. But I think to that point, like whether it's 10 years ago or not, if you're interested in something which is going to take your time to the point where you're not going to be as an effective X, Y, or Z,
Yeah.
that it's like if it's too different, even though it's related, it's like focus on the things that are going to help you be stronger than the others, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. Now, for the next generation, the ones coming behind you and I, for someone listening who wants to build their own thing in design, whether it's their own agency, a studio, or something that doesn't even have a name yet,
Mhm.
what do you actually want to tell them first?
Wait. Before you start your own thing, get out there and work for other people doing the same thing or something similar. It's easier to make mistakes on someone else's dime than on your own. And
Yeah,
that
it is.
I've had the conversation with many designers that are like, when I graduate design school, I'm going to open my own studio. To be like, that's just the beginning of you learning. Frankly,
Right.
that I'm like, I've made this parallel before that you should spend, I think, what does it take for like a physician?
8 years,
Another
I
like
think.
6 years
Yeah.
after undergrad.
Yeah.
I think if you look at your first 6 years after art school to give that same level of relentlessness and drive after those 6 years is when you're ready, that you're just beginning to learn. And that if you start working for yourself, this is my point of view, others will say something completely different, is that I get nervous about people plateauing too early
Hmm.
because they're limited by what they know.
Hmm.
And that they didn't get the opportunity to go work on some campaign for Nike or some nonprofit that they're really passionate about, that
Yeah.
wouldn't have hired somebody that didn't have years of experience. But there's so much knowledge that you can pick up from working from other senior designers and creative directors and executives, that it's like, that's where the real like knowledge transfer of things that they don't teach in college is happening, kind of working alongside those folks, that
Yeah.
make you so much stronger and prepare you to be the best version of what you're dreaming to build. But by
Mhm.
doing it prematurely, I think it's, you run the risk of,
It can be detrimental to yourself. Now, Gus, when someone experiences a brand, a campaign that you've helped build, whether they know your name or not, what do you ultimately hope they feel? And what do you hope they carry with them after that experience?
I think at the best form of this stuff, I think of the work that I've done for nonprofits and things, that it's like that the best version of the work that I consider to be significant, that they felt moved, that moved to think differently, moved to act differently. And hopefully it's something that they remember. And so I still hunger for more projects and opportunities to do that kind of work, and we'll get out there and find it, but it doesn't happen all the time. But I think I think a lot of times I think it may be like our for-profit work is just kind of teeing up the opportunity for like when those moments come that we can make an
Yeah.
impact. And so that's what I'll say.
And lastly, what would you tell your younger self, the kid that's traveling Minnesota, Chicago, in these rooms, kind of not seeing anyone that looks like him represented? What would you tell this kid if you could sit down and speak with him now?
Long dramatic pause. Think I'd say, continue working hard, but remember the fun, that there's so much in that if you're not enjoying the work isn't going to be good and interesting, and you're not going to enjoy life as a designer. And I think that's kind of really what I've kept returning to. Not that everything has to be, just joy and giggles all of the time, but I think that you're moving in an environment that's encouraging and supporting and is as familiar and comfortable, and people that are about that as well, and that you're doing work that is satisfying. And that I think the times that I feel like zig is when we've gotten off that course and be like, oh, this isn't something, that this is off. Let's adjust. And that's, I think, the key thing, whether it's like, I think of the stuff that we talked about, kind of from going from a 70 KFT to Sixtera to, I think even now with Waza, it's been those kind of course corrects. Like, look, how do I take this experience, these experiences that I've had, the great relationships that I've built, and continue to do some work that is interesting and fun, and give me the opportunities to make an impact when I can.
Well, you guys, thank you so much for listening to our podcast today. My name is Justin Robinson. I'm sitting here. I'm going to give him his flowers. The man's a master designer. He's legit. I'm talking about you go from starting your business to leaving your business to CEO, CFO, and now going back and starting it all over again, all for the love of design. The man, the myth, the legend, Gus Granger. And this is the Art School Graduate Podcast. We'll catch you guys later. Peace.
Appreciate you.